Hello, my soccer universe. My name is Roland and this is Football Talk, and today we're talking about the Europa League. And unlike for the Champions League, where I was really time constrained, I actually will manage to get a standalone preview episode for the Europa League out. The competition starts on Wednesday with a double round. Quite some interesting fixtures in the opening round. I mean, nothing compared to the Champions League, but still, I would say quite some interesting fixtures. And I would argue the Europa League has been the most entertaining competition last season. But then the two English teams that were really, really bad in the league rose to the top. That kind of devalued the competition for me. But I would say up until the quarterfinals, I enjoyed the Europa League the most. And it doesn't suffer from the sameness that we have in the Champions League. Always the same top teams in there. Although this has been diminished, to be honest, as well. Now in the Champions League with opening it up a little bit more either. In this episode, I'm gonna first talk about the entire qualification process, and that's mostly for the video part to show off the few teams that I have in my collection and the graphics that I've made, so that this was not completely lost time. However, I think it's always a good way to see how this competition started and how many teams were actually involved before we made into the league phase. And yes, few then dropped in from the Champions League, that we'll see in a bit. Then we'll discuss the draw and the implications. It's always hard with a league phase draw, but at least I have simulated the Europa League before the draw and after the draw, so we can at least talk about a little bit winners and losers. And then lastly, we look at the overall favorites. How will the league phase potentially pan out? And then we'll finish it with the preview of round one of the league phase. Sorry, getting too excited. But let's start with qualification. Okay, like with the Champions League preview, I also want to run through the qualification results. And yes, should have done this sooner, but this is my summer thing that I do. I prepare all these files, keeping track of that. There's usually not much time to talk about these in a video or a podcast episode. I drop them in, the ones that I'm watching, which is mostly the Austrian teams. The other ones, I don't get to see all that much. But let's start at the very, very beginning, round one. And I'm happy that in the new format, there's again a round one in Europa League qualifying. It looked weird when the Europa League qualifying, so we're around 2 or if not around 3, honestly. To me, it was surprising to see that Legia Warsaw actually had to go into the first round with a 2-0 aggregate win over Oktober from Kazakhstan. They actually move on. Shakhtar, also a team that I wouldn't expect there, 6-0 over Ilves Tampere. And Häcken, actually 3-2 on aggregate over Spartak Trnava. Quite a big result. If we go to the next page, we see that Celje just went by Azerbaijan's Saba, 6-5 on aggregate. An absolute crazy game. They actually had an away win, but then did it in overtime. Hapoel Beersheva got ousted by Bulgaria's Levski Sofia, which is a team that I, of course, do support, as it is my wife's team or my wife's grandfather's team. Levski did it on penalties, and I think it's actually a pretty big win for Bulgarian soccer. And then Sheriff had no trouble with Pristina, and Larnaca ousted Partizan on penalties. Another really, really long penalty shootout. Let's move on into the second round. And in the second round, we already had some slight upsets. Anderlecht being ousted by Häcken on penalties. Yes, Häcken was in the Europa League phase last season, as far as I remember. Maybe not that surprising, but still, I would consider Anderlecht a much bigger name than Häcken. So a little bit of surprise. Lugano also ousted by Cluj. Lugano, who have been in the Conference League, I think at least a round of 16. And then a big name matchup, Shakhtar Donetsk completely disposing of Besiktas with a 6-2 win on aggregate. Of course, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was shortly thereafter fired. 4 more matches in round 2. Utrecht, no trouble. Sheriff, 7-2 on aggregate. They've had a really good season in the Eredivisie last season, so I would consider them really strong. You could also see that Braga just started out in the league, or had not even started in the league. They only managed to get past Levski thanks to a overtime goal. So yeah, Hibs ousted by Midtjylland. Maybe not too big of a surprise. And Legia, in quite an interesting one against Banik Ostrava, a 4-3 on aggregate. Let's move on to round 3, and there it gets more plentiful, and we get already quite some big results. Irish champions lost in the end against Rijeka, despite holding a 2-1 lead from the win in Rijeka. However, Rijeka then win it 3-1 in Dublin. We had QPS ousting RFS, Midtjylland over Fredrikstad, relatively easy. Brann actually win the Nordic duel against Häcken, 2-1 aggregate, 2 away wins in this one. And then the Lincoln Red Imps, the Gibraltar champion, ousted Noah again on penalties, a little bit of a surprise. Wolfsburg were rather unlucky to not go past PAOK. I mean, they had so many chances in the first game in Thessaloniki. However, they could not find the back of the net. They even had the better chances in the return leg, although PAOK a little bit more controlled at the one. It was a wide range shot that then saw Wolfsburg lose out in overtime. That actually was a real gut punch for them, I gotta say. Again, two hearts. I really like PAOK. I want PAOK to do well, but on the other side, we also want Austrian teams to go through. And yeah, Wolfsburg really gave PAOK a run for their money, something you couldn't really expect. On the second page, we had Zrinjski Moscow going over Breidablik. Utrecht, yes, 2-1 home win, but 5-2 an aggregate over Servette, also rather emphatic. Story of the Hammer Spartans ends with a 5-2 on aggregate loss to Maccabi Tel Aviv. Shakhtar lose against Panathinaikos in overtime again. Very similar story to the PAOK game. And then Braga over Cluj, Easy and Legia lose on aggregate to AEK Larnaca. And so we go into the playoff, and everyone in there will go in a group stage. The question is only, where do you go? Brann, easy over Larnaca. Midtjylland also flatten QPS, so they go in that group stage. The Swedish champions Malmö, very easy over Sigma Olmütz as well. Panathinaikos again scraping by against Samsunspor, but a Greek-Turkish duel has always some spice to it. Bulgarian champions do it over Skendia, 5-3 aggregate, and PAOK lost the first match in Rijeka against the Croatian champions 1-0, but then came back with a 5-0 home win, so much easier for them than they did against Wolfsburg. Then on the second page, a surprise that Maccabi Tel Aviv ousted Dynamo Kiev. Dynamo Kiev only in the Conference League, something that I did not quite see. Utrecht relatively easy over Zrinjski Mostar. Genk similarly, yes, they lose the second leg against Lech Poznan at home, but they already won the first one quite emphatically. And Young Boys also had some trouble with Slovan, but overall they went through. FCSB over Aberdeen. It was not the Scottish round this last midweek of August. And Braga just easy cruising past the Lincoln Red Imps. So after qualification, we have here the following 4 pots for the 36 qualified teams. And again, it goes by UEFA coefficient. So Roma, who have been doing well as of late, have of course the highest coefficient. I have to say some of these are rather uneven. I mean, look at pot 4, Bologna, Celta, Stuttgart are not teams that you would expect in pot 4. Even Utrecht, who have been doing really well. And then there are some other teams in the other pots where I wouldn't necessarily say that they should be in there. But hey, it is what it is. I would probably see it a little bit different. I think we need to rethink the coefficient to a little bit more accurately reflect at least the strength of the leagues, because at the moment there's only a minimum coefficient that a team from a league can have, and that usually lands you in some lower pots, and you have to work yourself really hard to get into a higher pot. On the other side, do we really need to do it? Because let's face it, it doesn't really matter all that much, because every team gets 2 opponents out of every pot. And yeah, maybe the stratifying could be easy if you're in a pot 1, but I don't really know. It is something that I probably should look into it a little bit more at one time, if I find the time. Time is very much a constraint for me. But having said all that, let's look at the league opponents for pots 1 and pot 2, and you see all the way to the right, the bars. A green bar means that you had you had a positive draw, or the draw had a positive effect on your chances of winning or doing well in the competition. And the red bar means that you had a negative effect. And I can say that Red Bull Salzburg did not have a really good effect on the draw. Got a really, really tough one with Porto, Aston Villa. Ferencváros is probably a team that you potentially can win, but Lyon, Basel is a tough team, Freiburg is a tough team, and Bologna for sure. Even the Go Ahead Eagles, I'm not sure in the current form that Salzburg will do well. Villa and Roma, 2 of the favorites, also got relatively tough draws. I mean, look at the opponents there. Yes, I think both of them should do well, although I have some doubt. Roma have to go twice to Glasgow. Never an easy away fixture. And also, going to Panathinaikos is probably not that easy. And when I look at Villa, yes, Fenerbahce away, Feyenoord away, those are major away games. But then at least you play Salzburg and Maccabi Tel Aviv at home. It's definitely also conditioned by Bologna being again in their opponent. Bologna is a very high-rated team, only in pot 4. That definitely will lower your chances of doing well in the competition. In pot 2, the winners, let's talk about those first. Pot 1 winners, Porto and Rangers, of course. Now, pot 2 winners, we had Lyon, we had Ferencváros, and we had PAOK having relatively good draws, whereas Maccabi Tel Aviv and in there, we have to also say they play on neutral ground, so that doesn't really help. And Victoria Pilsen getting relatively tough draws. And if I just look at the first 2 opponents for Victoria Pilsen, Porto at home and Roma away, it's not something that you want to have, to be honest. But even the other ones, there's a Freiburg in there, there's a trip to Athens in there. Yeah, probably not the easiest one. Let's go to pots 3 and 4. The worst draw in pot 3 was, of course, for Nice, the best one for Ludo Goretz. Betis at home is probably my match with the most opponent, I would say. Celta, you don't know. Celta should be a better team, but you never know. They are making their return to Europe after a long time. Nice got hammered. Again, Roma, Porto, Braga, Freiburg in there, Celta. Not an easy draw for sure. When I look at Sturm Graz, slightly boosted, although I have to say I don't even see Sturm Graz really advancing, although they might be the better one of the 2 Austrian teams. Rangers at home, that gives memories from about 25 years ago. The return of Arnautovic to Austria with Red Star Belgrade is probably something that everyone looks forward to. Also, you got Nottingham Forest, and you need to beat Brann. There's also an away trip to Panathinaikos. Again, memories from before, but Feyenoord is an opponent that Sturm have been performing badly against over the past few seasons. So they meet them again. And then pot 4, Bologna, slightly negative. Most negative is Utrecht, and also Celta Vigo got relatively tough opponents. Panathinaikos doing actually quite well in there. Roma, Feyenoord, but then Pilsen, Ferencváros, Sturm, Young Boys, Go Ahead Eagles, and Malmö seems manageable in a way. So their chances were really boosted by the draw, whereas Utrecht, Porto, Betis, Lyon, Celtic, and Nottingham Forest and Freiburg, that's a pretty tough draw, I gotta say, in the context of the entire competition. Now, it's usually easier than to look how did the expected standings evolve there, and you see the arrows, who moved up, who moved down, and the 2 Premier League teams are now on top because Roma got a relatively tough draw. Roma ahead of the draw was in second spot, now only in third. You see Lyon, Porto boosted, Bologna and Betis falling off a teeny bit. Then we have, of course, Stuttgart, Celta, Freiburg, Fenerbahce, Feyenoord, Celtic, Nice, Zagreb, and being the seeded teams expected to be, and making it into the round is Panathinaikos and Braga, flipping over to the second page. Basel, Genk, Rangers, Midtjylland, Brann, and PAOK just in. No Austrian team is even scheduled to make it in. Salzburg a little bit higher. I don't quite get it. But, the bookies rate Salzburg a little bit higher than Sturm Graz, which to me is not quite understandable. I can very well see Salzburg, like the last Champions League, only picking up at most 3 points, to be honest. There are quite some teams on the bubble. This is a feature of the Europa League. Everyone is kind of close together. So the expected points, for instance, for Basel are 10.4. And if we go the same thing down, Salzburg has 9.3 points to go in. PAOK is the last team at the moment with 9.7 points. Of course, everything will evolve as the competition pans out, and I think there will be plenty of changes. But this is what my model predicts for now, and the teams are also so close together that over multiple runs there might be even slight changes here as well. Overall favorites, well, this is where it's Villa, Roma, Forest, Bologna. So an English-Italian setup. I honestly don't trust Bologna that much. I actually would think that the Spanish teams could do actually quite well here, and I think that the German teams are vastly overlooked. Stuttgart in 10, Freiburg in 11. But again, it's bookies and the ratings that make up the strength, and yeah, I don't know. It doesn't quite feel right, and I think Roma also profit from having a big name, but I think Roma could do something if they find their mojo under Gasperini. I think Roma could do something. However, will they be able to beat a Villa and a Forest? We'll see. Those two teams had rough starts to the Premier League already. But then remember what happened last year, and we had an all-English final. Let's look at the first set of games. As I said, it starts on Wednesday. We have two early kickers, Midtjylland Sturm and Pau against Maccabi Tel Aviv. I mean, Midtjylland Sturm is already quite an interesting one, at least from an Austrian perspective. I would expect Pau to do something against Maccabi. Then a pretty big matchup. Betis hosting Forest. That will also tell us something. As is Prague against Feyenoord and Crvena Zvezda Celtic. Kind of gives me the feels. But to me, the most interesting obviously is Freiburg Basel. I mean, those cities, despite being in different countries, are probably a half-hour drive from each other. I mean, they share an airport. That, I think, will be quite atmospheric, as should be Dinamo Zagreb against Fenerbahce. It's only played in the wrong stadium. Malmö Ludogorets is probably one to overlook. Nice Roma, definitely an interesting one. Then on Wednesday, again, two early games. We have Go Ahead Eagles against FCSB from Romania and Lille against Bran. Should be clear, but Go Ahead Eagles. I don't think this is their maiden voyage, but they have not been in Europe for a long time. Another big matchup involving a Premier League team, Villa hosting Bologna, but the Bologna are not the Bologna from last season. We have a, if you want, Austro-Hungarian Empire clash between Ferencváros and Viktoria Pilsen. Rangers take on Genk, where former last keeper Toby Laval is playing. Salzburg hosting Porto will tell us already a whole lot. And another top 5 league clash between Stuttgart and Celta Vigo. Utrecht against Lyon could be interesting, and the Young Boys take on Panathinaikos. In conclusion, I gotta say, I'm actually really looking forward to this Europa League season. Yes, there are two Austrian teams in there. I was hoping for slightly more favorable draws for them, because I actually think that Salzburg will have a really hard time. I have a little bit more hope for Sturm, but Sturm also lost plenty of big name players. So this might actually be a bad season for Austria this time around. All to be seen. Any case, let me know who are your favorites to win this Europa League competition. Will we see again an all-English final, or will maybe an Italian or Spanish team make it through? Always look on the Spanish teams. Or will we get a total surprise? We'll see about that. Maybe a French team could also do something. There are 3 French teams in there. I think no other country has more teams in this competition, which I think is also exciting, but also shows that Ligue 1 is kind of on the bubble of being a top league, but they cannot get the teams really into the Champions League, so a few fall into the Europa League. Any case, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this episode, or leave a positive review also. Tell a friend if you enjoyed this episode. Maybe the friend will like it too. Be it as it may, I will talk to you soon about more things in my soccer universe. Bye!